All right, well, good evening, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us. My name is Gwen Kozlowski, and I'm the Education and Outreach Coordinator with the Vermont Urban and Community Forestry Program. We have some friends of our program here in attendance today, but for those of you who are new to us, the UCF team is a collaborative effort between UVM Extension and the Vermont Department of Forest, Parks, and Recreation. We provide technical, educational, and financial assistance to support communities in stewarding their tree resources. You can learn more about our work at vtcommunityforestry.org. We are here tonight to talk about one tiny insect that our program has been focusing on for years, emerald ash borer, or EAB. This invasive insect was found in Vermont in 2018 and poses an imminent threat to Vermont's 3 native species of ash. Their presence poses costly and confusing challenges to landowners, municipalities, and Vermont's forest ecosystems, and raises many questions that we will address tonight, like how should we manage the ash trees in our woods, yards, and streets? We are fortunate to have Ginger Nickerson, Forest Pest Education Coordinator with the Vermont Urban and Community Forestry Program, and Ethan Tapper, Chittenden County Forester, to lead our webinar tonight. Ginger will be covering the general EAB information, and Ethan will be highlighting the active forest management project currently underway at the Andrews Community Forest in Richmond. And we have a few folks here from Richmond as well, so I'm sure that they'll have some questions or good information to share. But before I hand it over, I'll remind participants a few of the webinar logistics. Your microphones will be muted during the presentation, and there's no video option for participants. If you have questions during the webinar, please feel free to put those in the question box in the side panel, and we will address those at the end of the presentation. This webinar is being recorded and will be available on our website tomorrow, vtcommunityforestry.org, and I will email that link out to anyone who is registered. One last item, we are curious about who we have on tonight. A few folks that signed on early, we used our question box to get a sense of towns. And I was just gonna launch a poll. And Ginger, is it the who is present poll?
Yes, please.
Okay, we'll launch this poll to see who we have here. So who are you representing? Town forest or trails, conservation committee member, municipal staff, select board, forest owner or forester, or I just want to learn more. I'll leave this up for another 15 to 30 seconds. All right, I think that's the majority of folks that we have that we're able to answer. So I'm going to go ahead and close this poll. We've got 30% representing a conservation committee member, and 35% I just want to learn more, and 25% forest owner or forester, and just a handful of town forest or trails committee or municipal staff or select board committee member. So we are delighted to have all of you on today. And with that, Ginger, you take us away.
So hi, everyone. As Gwen said, I am the Forest Pest Educator for Vermont Urban and Community Forestry, which is a collaborative effort between the Department of Forest, Parks, and Recreation and UVM Extension. And I'm operating under the assumption that most people were interested in participating in this webinar this evening because they're interested in managing for emerald ash borer on forests. However, not knowing how many of you have already seen presentations about managing emerald ash borer basics or for homeowners and municipalities, I'm going to spend about 15 to 20 minutes going over sort of the basic introduction and talking about some things that homeowners and municipalities might be interested in. And then Ethan will spend about 30 minutes talking about managing forest lands in the context of emerald ash borer, and then hopefully we'll have about 10 minutes for questions and discussion. So emerald ash borer is a beetle that is native to Asia. so it's invasive in the US. It was first detected in Detroit, Michigan in 2002, and now it is established in 35 states and 5 provinces. So we think that the way, well, we know that the way that it has been transported east across the country has largely been in different types of wood products and nursery products, and in particular, firewood has been one of the biggest mechanisms for dispersing this invasive pest across the country. So the pest itself, the beetle is, if you look in the, I think the top left-hand corner, you should see a green beetle with a little yellow circle around it, and that is the emerald ash borer. The other insects on here are insects that it is sometimes confused with by the public. So a range of different shiny green insects. But the beetle itself is quite small. It's about the size of a grain of rice, and as you can see, could fit on the head of a penny. And we're unlikely to see the adult beetles because they spend most of their lives up in the top of the canopy. So between the beginning of June and the end of September is what's considered flight season, when the adult beetles are active, and they will be feeding on ash leaves and laying their eggs. The beetle only is damaging to ash trees. That's the species of tree that it consumes. And what happens is the adults will lay the eggs in the top branches, and then the eggs hatch and their larvae will start to burrow through the bark and into the cambial layer, which is in between the inner bark and the wood of the tree. And they will spend between 1 and 2 years making tunnels and consuming that cambial layer, and then they will emerge in the late spring, early summer as adults and start the cycle all over again. So this is a picture of a tree, an ash tree that has been infested for quite a long time. And this is what happens, that the outer bark has been stripped off. And so we're just looking at the larval tunnels or galleries. And the cambial layer is essentially the circulatory system of the tree. It's where the tree transports nutrients between its leaves and its roots. So as the larvae are consuming this, they're essentially cutting off the nutrition and starving the tree. So the outward symptoms that we might see for an infested tree are that we start to see the canopy thinning and branches in the canopy dying back because the tree is getting starved. It starts to put out these epicormic branches, or these side shoots, to try to increase photosynthesis and get more nutrients. But the symptom that we really look for being diagnostic, because ash trees can have thinning canopies or send out epicormic branches for lots of different reasons when they're stressed, is what we call woodpecker flecking. And woodpeckers are able to identify larval infestations in ash trees much sooner than humans. And as they start to hammer at the bark of the tree to get the larvae out, the outer bark will start to flake off, creating these paler colored bald patches on the trees, and it's very distinctive. And if you look closely, you can actually you can see areas where the woodpecker's bills have made little holes. So that's one of the things that we look at for diagnostic. Another thing that's considered diagnostic, but we don't rely on a lot, are the D-shaped exit holes that the adults make when they leave the tree. But actually, by the time these are at eye level, the tree is probably close to already being dead, and the holes are very, very small, and often they don't really look D-shaped. So we don't rely on that a whole lot. The most reliable and really only definitive way of diagnosing whether a stressed ash has an infestation of emerald ash borer is to actually peel away that layer of outer bark using a draw knife and looking for the larval galleries. And so you can see that on one of these trees, the tunnels or galleries are much thinner. And that's because the larvae have not been established for as long. And on the other one, the galleries are much thicker and there are a lot more of them, and those have been established for a longer period of time. But you'll see that both of them have these kind of distinctive S-shaped curves. Excuse me. So one of the tricky things about emerald ash borer infestations are that it takes a long time for the tree to start showing outward symptoms of being infested. So you can see in the top half of this image, during the first 3 or 4 years of infestation, the larvae are slowly working their way down and they're not making that much damage that would result in outward symptoms. So by the time we start seeing the canopy thinning or the epicormic branching, the tree has already been infested for 5 to 6 years possibly. Excuse me. So what we know from the 34 other states that have been infested before us are that we're going to lose almost all of our ash trees, almost 100%. And I think Ethan's going to talk a little bit more about that 1% that seems to persist or possibly have some resistance to the emerald ash borer. But what happens is that in the infested areas, you'll first just see a few trees for the first few years, and then after another couple years, you'll start to see more trees. But it's not until the infestation has been pretty well established and has been going on for 8 to 10 years where you'll start to see wide swaths of trees all dying. So where we think we are in Vermont is probably around year 5. But that's a rough guess. So it's not going to be until, maybe we've had it for year 10 where we'll start to see the massive die-off of our ash trees. And that's hopefully good news because it means it gives property owners and municipalities more time to plan and get prepared. If you're not familiar with ash trees, we have a lot of information to help you identify ash trees on btinvasives.org, but I'm just briefly going to say that we have 3 species of ash in Vermont: white ash, which you can find in upland forests; green ash, which is found along rivers, and it's planted extensively in towns as a street tree or shade tree for parks and parking lots and things. And then black ash, which is found in swamps. Excuse me. Currently, emerald ash borer has been confirmed in 9 counties, and we call this our egg yolk map. So the red areas, what happens is when there's a confirmed sighting of an adult or a confirmed tree that we can definitely say is infested, then we draw a 5-mile radius around that site. And that 5-mile radius is considered in an area that is infested. And the yellow area beyond that is a 10-mile radius, and it's considered at high risk of being infested. So our main recommendation right now is we're really trying to slow the spread of the infestations from those egg yolk or bullseyes around the state, and keep the infestation confined to those areas as much as possible for as long as possible, to give people time to make plans and prepare for how they want to deal with their ash trees. So the recommendations for slowing the spread are, if you have to, if you're harvesting ash or moving it in any way, trying to do that during the non-flight season, which is from October to April. If you are within one of those egg yolks or infested areas, to keep any ash wood inside that egg yolk and not take it outside of the infested area. If you're a member of an industry like a firewood vendor or a logger, and you do have to move it outside of the infested area, you want to treat it before you do that. And the things that are considered valid forms of treatment are chipping it, grinding it, or through kiln drying or some other kind of heat treatment. In general, these are recommendations and not enforceable, but there is a law in the books that says that it's illegal to knowingly transport pests in Vermont. So if you have a tree that's visibly infested, then there are a number of different practices for different industries that you have to follow before you can transport the wood.
And
So,
Ginger, we've got about 3 or 4 minutes left.
Great,
for
thanks.
Your section.
So why should homeowners and municipalities care about this? And this is very different set of concerns than forest and woodlot owners would have. But one reason is that there might be a tree that you want to preserve. And fortunately, there are insecticides that you can use to treat and save those trees. But the other concern is that when ash trees die, they become very brittle and will come down either on their own or in storms. And so homeowners and municipalities need to be careful about removing any trees or either treating or removing trees that could become potentially hazardous. And so there are kind of 3 different approaches to managing. One is to remove or treat the tree now before the area that you're in becomes infested, to spread out your treatment or removals over time, or to wait until your trees die and then remove them. And I'm happy to answer questions about these at the end of the presentation, but the final option is really the most expensive of the 3 different ways of responding. Urban and community forestry provides technical assistance to municipalities, and one of the things that we do is help municipalities inventory their ash trees that are in the public right-of-way, because those are on public property and the municipality is legally responsible for them. So I can also happy to share more information about the insecticide treatment that can be used to preserve trees. So the takeaways for municipalities and homeowners are that emerald ash borer is here. We're expecting that it will, over a period of years, kill the majority of any untreated ash trees, municipalities are responsible for managing ash trees in public right-of-ways. And one of the important things that you can do to start preparing if your municipality is to inventory your trees. We have lots and lots of resources available at vtinvasives.org and also at vtcommunityforestry.org. And if you think that there's a tree that you're concerned might be infested, you can go to vtinvasives.org and upload photographs, and our team will evaluate your tree and decide if somebody should come out and visit it. And if you have additional questions, please feel free to reach out to me at ginger.nickerson@uvm.edu. And that's it for my part of the presentation. And now I will switch us over to Ethan Tapper to talk about forest lands.
Thank you, Ginger. So can you see my PowerPoint here?
I can.
Awesome. So my name's Ethan Tapper. I'm the Chittenden County Forester, and this event is part of an event series that we're doing where we're trying to provide a lot of really great content and help people understand forests and our other ecosystems and forest management better. In addition to specifically highlighting a forest management project at the Andrews Community Forest, which is this amazing 428-acre town-owned forest in the town of Richmond. And we just started in the last couple of weeks, we just started this forest management project where we're going to be managing the forest actively for all these really exciting things like climate resiliency, clean air, clean water, wildlife habitat, complexity, diversity, old growth forest attributes and stuff like that. And so it's something that we really want to highlight. And at the end of this presentation, I'll give you some resources on how you can learn more about that project going forward. And each one of these events, we're trying to highlight sort of a different aspect of the work that we're doing. And so for this, I'll focus on the forest management at Andrews within the context of addressing this huge landscape-wide problem, the emerald ash borer, which is this really existential threat to the health of our forests in Vermont that we're going to be increasingly dealing with going forward. So here's our confirmed infested regions. I believe this is the most current map. As you can see on this, looks like an egg yolk. This is, somewhere inside this orange area is a confirmed infestation, a tree that was found with EAB in it. We assume that it's 5 miles from there by the time we found that one confirmed tree. So that's that orange area is a 5-mile circle around that confirmed infested tree, and then expect it to spread another 5 miles very soon. So that's that yellow circle around that. Here's Chittenden County right here. And as you can see, I have not let it yet penetrate the borders of Chittenden County, although we do have some nearby infestations here in South Hero and then here in Bristol, which are sort of knocking at our door. That's a joke. All joking aside, it could be here. It may well be within Chittenden County. We just don't know it yet. There is the Andrews Community Forest right there. And as you can see, we're sort of cornered, on all sides. Here's that Bristol infestation. This is, I believe, Montpelier. This is South Hero. And so if it's not in Richmond or in a adjacent town now, it is likely that it will be very soon. So in Vermont broadly, white ash makes up about 5% of our forest trees. It's one of our 10 most common tree species. So when you hear that, you're like, maybe it's not that big of a deal, but there are forests where the ash component is much higher. 20 to 70%, it's really bad up in Grand Isle County, and there's also some really interesting ash-heavy ecosystems like Champlain Valley clay plain forests and red maple black ash swamps that are in Chittenden County, where the ash percentage is very high and plays these really important ecological functions. At the Andrews Community Forest, ash is not particularly populous. It is in stand 1, which is one of our younger stands with some more rich soils, which is sort of where ash likes to grow. It is about 13% of the total composition, so it's not nothing. In the other stands, it's lower, but it is present throughout all the stands. We should know that it's an ecologically and economically valuable tree. It performs all these important functions as far as wildlife habitat. Forest birds use them, foraging on the bark. The leaves have specific nutrient cycling characteristics, and it has this really important role in especially our rich northern hardwood forest ecosystems. But suffice to say that it's important, and all of our native species are important. It's also valuable. It's a really cool wood that probably many of the folks who are listening to this have somewhere in their house. It's good looking wood and very useful. And there are, like we said, there are 3 native species: white, black, and brown, and green. Most ash that we're talking about in a forest management context, so upland ash, which just means that not in a wetland, not in a riparian area, so one of those floodplains where you might find green ash. We're talking about white ash, which is by far the most common species of ash that we have. There is a little bit of hope. I say this, and I put a little bit in small letters because I don't want folks to think that something's going to come swooping in and save the day. It is in all these other states, and every indication is that it's going to come to Vermont and it's going to massively lower the amount of ash on our landscape. However, there are instances in these areas that have been infested for a long time of what we call lingering ash, which I think is such a great term, ash that have overstayed their welcome. These are ash that are able to persist and survive in an infested area after emerald ash borer has moved through it. There is also always the chance of genetic resistance, and that future generations of white ash in Vermont will be able to have some sort of resistance to the emerald ash borer. They'll have to, because we expect emerald ash borer to be persistent in our landscape over the long term. What some of these other states have shown us is that, what we initially thought or hoped would happen is that emerald ash borer would come through, it would wipe out all the ash, it would have nothing left to eat, and then it would just die, right? But what we're seeing is that it's just infesting smaller and smaller stems, persisting at a low level on the landscape, and then infesting ash trees as they become large enough to infest. There definitely is, there are some populations of ash that show some genetic resistance, and there may be future populations that don't even exist yet. And so we really want to sort of hedge our bets on keeping ash on the landscape in case that we can save this species. It takes a really long time to make a species, and this one is really, really important to us. Keeping ash on the landscape in general also gives us a chance to, if we someday in the future find some way to deal with EAB proactively, that ash is still here and we can have future generations of ash. So these are the 4 forest management goals that we say when we're talking about managing for ash in the context of EAB. And I'm going to go through them all individually. These are all strategies that we're going to be using at the Andrews Community Forest, sort of putting into place both to demonstrate responsible ash management and then also just to keep the forest at the Andrews Community Forest really healthy. So goal 1, maintain ash as a component of the forest. So it's really, really important. There's a common misconception. People think that if they go through their woods and cut all their ash trees, that it isn't going to in some way help the problem, or it will some way protect their neighbor's property, something like that. It doesn't work that way. They've tried quarantines, they've tried doing removals like that to sort of make it so ash borer couldn't spread into adjacent areas. It doesn't work. So don't do it for that reason. Removing all ash also eliminates the chance that we could have genetic resistance and for future generations of ash in the landscape. So what I often tell people is that the resistance on the landscape is very low. But within individual populations, it can be much higher. So if you go out on your woodlot and you're like, I'm going to cut every single ash tree, it could be that the genetics in your woodlot are such that there is some genetic resistance to emerald ash borer, and you completely eliminate those genetics from our landscape by just cutting them all. This also doesn't mean you have to cut no ash. Cutting some ash while also preserving ash of all different shapes and sizes, especially these larger seed trees that we really want to encourage, is totally acceptable. And we're actually trying to regenerate ash. And so silvics are a term that we use in silviculture. Silviculture just means the textbook definition is the art and the science of tending the forested stand. And silvics are the characteristics that define our different tree species and how they behave. So white ash silvics, they're said to be what a mid-tolerant, so somewhere in between being really tolerant of shade and being not at all tolerant of shade. The truth is that that's actually a hybridization of different shade tolerances at different times of their life. So as a seedling, they're one of our advanced regeneration dependent species, which just means that they establish in the understory in very shaded conditions, and they just kind of hang out in the understory and wait for something to happen, wait for a canopy tree to fall over, or decline, and then they shoot up into the overstory. So they're very tolerant of shade as a seedling, but as an adult tree, they're actually not very tolerant at all. And adults need openings of over a quarter acre, which is fairly large, to reach adulthood. That's about 100-acre square. They're fast growing, they're relatively short-lived compared to some of the species that they grow with, like sugar maple. They're dioecious, which is really interesting, meaning that many tree species are monoecious, which means that they have both male and female flowers on the same tree. Some ash trees are male, some ash trees are female, and so sometimes you can actually specifically try and retain female ash trees, which are going to be those big sources of seed, although of course you also need male ash trees to fertilize those flowers. Goal number 2, so we want to, in addition to keeping ash in our forest, we want to promote a diversity of native species, of all native species, which includes ash. And we also, this is just a good goal. If any of you have heard me speak about forest management before, you'll know that I just think that this is what we should be doing all the time. Promoting both a diversity of native species and then a diversity of different sort of what I would call structural conditions in the forest, so different sizes and ages of trees. The more we learn about forests, the more we learn that diversity is a direct correlate to forest resilience. So it helps forests be able to maintain their health through times of great stress, like climate change, natural disturbances of increasing severity and intensity, stuff like that, and outbreaks of pests, stuff that's challenging its health directly, like emerald ash borer outbreaks. Retaining and promoting diversity in the forest will also make that forest healthier and allow it to sort of buffer those impacts of future pathogens, other stuff coming down the pike, and climate change. And then we also know that making our forests more complex and more diverse also has these massive ecosystem-wide benefits that are not limited to ash. So it makes sort of everything better. It makes a greater diversity of different conditions for wildlife, all different types of wildlife. Resilience, it makes a forest able to sequester and store more carbon over the long term. There's just a lot of upside to making forests more complex. And I should also say that that's what old growth forests look like. So that's sort of the model that we use in ecological forest management to judge how we manage our forests. So what can we do to limit threats to diversity and regeneration after emerald ash borer comes through? So we need to sort of be thinking ahead about, if we want to promote a diversity of native species, including ash, what are the factors that threaten that diversity, biodiversity across our landscape over time? And so a few examples of that are invasive exotic plants. So right here you see a picture of Japanese barberry. Invasive plants basically outcompete our native species and prevent our forests from undergoing their natural regenerative and successional processes that make them more diverse and complex. Deer browse is a huge issue at Andrews. And increasingly in Chittenden County in general. So what deer do is, where they're overpopulated, as we now know they are in a bunch of parts of the state, they will browse certain species and not browse other species. So they're going to browse the red oak and the sugar maple and the yellow birch, and they're not going to browse the invasive plants and the beech. And so what they'll do is effectively steer future generations of the forest towards those species that they don't like to eat. And of course, we want all species to be able to grow and flourish, in addition to actually promoting really good deer habitat. We want deer to have stuff to browse. We just want our forest to be able to be diverse in spite of that. And then the other big one, the one that really keeps me up at night, is forest fragmentation and loss. So we need to keep our forests forested, and we need to keep them whole and prevent them being fragmented by roads, housing, commercial development. That doesn't mean that we can't develop our communities and more people can't have places to live in Vermont, but it does mean that we need to think really critically about how we do that, and specifically concentrate our development towards already fragmenting features rather than taking these big intact forested blocks and cutting them all up into smaller and smaller pieces. So sometimes I put in a slide in one of these presentations just to remind me to talk about something, and I actually emailed this to myself a while ago: forest management, an opportunity. And what this is reminding me to say is that while there are opportunities to manage your forest in light of the emerald ash borer, to create, those quarter-acre openings that we know are big enough to bring an ash to maturity, or to release some pockets of those advanced regeneration young ash seedlings that are ready to be released and shot up into the overstory, to make our forest more complex and diverse, to thin around maybe some of our ash trees that we want to encourage and give a little bit more juice. It's also always an opportunity to make your forests healthier, more complex, more resilient in general. So if you were to go into your forest and just say, I'm just dealing with this ash borer thing, this is all I'm going to do, I'm just going to go in there, cut all the ash, you would, I think, lose an opportunity to take that time that you have those tools in the woods. You have a logger, you have a forester, you have a forest management plan, and use that to make your forest healthier for everything, in light of the emerald ash borer and in light of all the other various threats to our forests, and also just moving towards a condition which is healthier, which provides more wildlife habitat, which makes our forests in general across the landscape just more rich with all the things we care about. And the type of forestry that I practice, and the type of forestry we're practicing on the Andrews Community Forest, and increasingly foresters all over the place are practicing, is something that's called ecological forestry. So this is the idea that, sort of taking that opportunity, right? We're taking the opportunity afforded to us by the traditional tools of forest management, logging, and we're using that to, instead of, just sort of take out the products that we want to harvest from the woods and, make some money, we want to make forests more complex, more diverse, more like old growth forests. And so I say we're trying to, within the context of ecological forestry, we're trying to manage forests like they manage themselves. So there's a long history of folks managing forests how they think they should be managed, rather than how they're actually observing that forests change and develop over time. We're also managing forests as complex systems. So these systems which include trees, but are not limited to trees. So now, the more we understand about forests, the more we understand that there are these incredibly complex systems comprised of trees, but also animals, and also fungi and invertebrates, bugs, natural processes. All these different things are really, really important, and they're all part of how we manage forests in the long term to be healthy. Traditional forest management would have us sort of just like look at the trees and that's it. But we want to really broaden that, both to do a better job, because we know that all these other elements are really important parts of how forests are healthy over time, but also because those other parts are also important. And the way that forests grow and develop is intrinsically important, and we can manage them within that context. And again, I'm going to say this a gajillion times: manage forests for complexity, diversity, and resilience always. So an example of one reason why we might want to manage forests as a complex system ties back to this guy. It's the pileated woodpecker, a wicked cool animal, and thought by many to be actually a keystone species. So the pileated woodpecker plays a really important role. A keystone species just meaning it's a species that creates habitat for many other species and creates opportunities for many other species in its ecosystem. The beaver being sort of the classic example of that. So it's thought that the pileated woodpecker could be classified as a keystone species because of its role in nutrient cycling. So it's basically helping digest these trees, this dead wood, and helping make it into soil and make it food for some of these soil invertebrates and fungi and other stuff that then does the next part of that digestion. Also in the way that it creates cavities in trees, the holes in the trees when it's that it excavates when it's looking for food, which are used by everything from flying squirrels to owls to fisher to all different kinds of birds as their as nesting sites and denning sites. And we call those cavity trees with a lot of holes in them, wildlife hotels for that reason. Pileated woodpeckers are also a significant, have the ability to significantly lower and slow down. They're not going to take care of the problem, but they're going to slow down EAB in the forest. And so we actually want to create great habitat for them. Now, they need large diameter, they need dead standing trees, dead wood, and large diameter cavity trees in order to nest in, like trees over 20 inches in diameter. So if we're going around and eliminating all the dead trees, cutting every tree before it dies, cutting all the big trees, we're not going to have habitat for this species, which is going to take away a significant tool that we have for mitigating EAB. So that's just sort of an example. Managing in an ecological context, we're managing for, in addition to healthy trees, we're managing for cavity trees and snags, dead standing trees. We're leaving large legacy trees in the woods, which are providing habitat for pileated woodpeckers, which are going to in turn help our forest be more resilient and have more time to deal with EAB infestations. In practice, I just said many of these things, but ecological forestry means managing for many different sizes, ages, and species of trees. Creating canopy gaps of all shapes and sizes, including creating gaps large enough that are going to facilitate those ash coming to maturity. We're retaining and creating lots of dead wood, and we're retaining and recruiting big old trees, what I call legacy trees or biological legacy trees at every entry. So these are trees that I would say we're not managing them for timber, we're just managing them to be big trees and to afford to the forested ecosystem the benefits of big trees. And a big part of the work that I do is also looking at old growth forests and trying to help our forests, which are relatively young, become more like old growth forests sooner than they would be able to naturally. The features that are endemic to old growth forests is exactly what you see. So some big trees, but also many different sizes, ages, and species of trees, canopy gaps, dead wood everywhere. We can do all those things within the context of commercial forest management. So goal number 3, conserve the economic value of ash. This is just recognizing that ash is a valuable renewable resource. It contributes positively to forest landowners, helps them pay their taxes, keep their forested land as forest, it's a force for economic equity in that being able to harvest your land, make a little money off it periodically, helps it be affordable to own forested land, so you don't have to be rich to own a forest. And it supports our local economies, firewood industries, related industries, and our forest-based recreation industry, which is highly dependent on private lands in order to function. It's okay to harvest ash before EAB comes through. A lot of people are concerned about losing the value in those trees. Again, I think local renewable resources harvested well in an ecological context is something we can be really proud of. So yeah, you can harvest some ash. You can feel okay about profiting off that. You just need to also make sure that you're retaining healthy ash of all different sizes. You don't need to freak out. So you don't need to, walk down the street and find some logger you've never heard of before and not have time to call your forester. You have time to plan a thoughtful timber harvest where you're getting all your ducks in a row. You get the logger you want. You're communicating with your forester about having a good timber sale contract and making sure it's happening at the right time of the year. If you rush, you're not gonna have as many options for managing your forest really well, and your forest is worth it. Take the time that you need. Emerald ash borer is not gonna kill your ash tree tomorrow. That said, if this is something that you're concerned about, start the process now. Contact your forester now, and just let them know that you're interested in harvesting some ash as part of a broader forest management system. Again, use harvesting as an opportunity. You can harvest ash. You can do this really great management in light of EAB while you're also making your forest more resilient, healthy, diverse, complex. And if you choose not to harvest ash, all you lose is the value of those trees. So you don't have to. Again, you're not going to help your neighbors or help your community necessarily from being infested themselves, their own forests and trees by EAB, by harvesting those trees. And so if you just don't want to do that, you don't have to do it. And all that's going to happen is that those trees are going to die. They're going to get hollowed out by woodpeckers and be great wildlife habitat. They're going to fall on the ground and be awesome habitat for other wildlife, invertebrates, fungi, turn into soil and get sucked up by future generations of trees, and that's also okay. So goal number 4, Goal number 4 is to slow the spread. So again, we don't have a way to stop emerald ash borer at the moment, but by slowing it, we're going to give everybody more time to respond, which is really, really important. forest landowners who might be interested in capturing some of that value and doing some adaptive EAB management in their woodlot. Foresters, other land managers, municipalities is a big one. So, think about the cost that needs to be borne by these municipalities as they take down hundreds or thousands of green ash trees. If they can spread that over a long period of time, both the removals and the replacements, that will be very, very beneficial rather than them having to remove every tree at once because the infestation is really bad. Utilities, same deal. Giving all of us more time will just help us make better decisions and give us sort of more tools to respond to this issue with. We do have slow the spread recommendations, which, as Ginger mentioned, vtinvasives.org is a good place to find them. Basically, we don't want to move ash outside of these infested areas during the flight season. So all that means is that we don't want to take trees with ash borers in them and transport them to places where ash borer is not and cause an infestation in that way. There is an opportunity outside of that flight season. So after October 1st, before May 31st, you can transport ash materials even from one of those infested areas, given that it's not visibly infested. So you can never transport it if it's visibly infested with the emerald ash borer. That's illegal, as Ginger mentioned. But you can transport it from those infested areas to a market, to a mill that has what's called a compliance agreement. They basically say that they're gonna process that tree in a way where if there's any larvae in it, they'll be dead before that flight season starts. And so they're gonna sort of make it so that they can't spread from those ash trees that you've transported. Even if you're not in one of those confirmed infested areas, I'd recommend that you still abide by these rules and that you still not move ash trees during that flight season, and just never move firewood or pieces of trees very far. Just keep it local. Buy from someone in your town if you can, or as close to your town as you can. Again, we don't know everywhere where this pest is, and there's a high possibility that it's in multiple places that we don't know about, and you could be transporting it from an area that's not within the confirmed infested area and just not know it. And again, BT and go ahead, Gwen.
Sorry, a few more minutes, if you 3 or 4 minutes, and then we can have 10 minutes for questions.
Yep, I'm just about done.
Great.
Oh, so everything we do to sort of bring it back to the Andrews Community Forest, these are all tools that we're using at Andrews to manage for the small amount of ash that we have. And everything we do at the Andrews Community Forest and at other community forests that we worked with can be compounded by conducting outreach and education around this. So this is both for Andrews as a property that we really, really care about, and then also for all of you, other people in the communities in the surrounding areas, to learn about what forest management's all about and how we manage forests in light of stuff like EAB and other issues. And the goal is that this process is open and transparent and inclusive, and that this is a major goal of this process, is not just to do this work, but also to use it as a tool to increase awareness. And so to learn more about the Andrews Community Forest, please stay tuned. We'll have more virtual events. The next one is, I believe, October 17th with Audubon Vermont about managing forests for bird habitat. You can stay tuned to the Andrews Community Forest Facebook page, Front Porch Forum. I post on Richmond Front Porch Forum, and I got a crew of folks around the county who post for me in other towns. You can also sign up for my email list by sending an email to ethan.tapper@vermont.gov. And I'm also posting video updates as we go on the Andrews Community Forest playlist of my YouTube channel. You can just search for Chittenden County Forester on YouTube and it'll pop right up. I just put a video up today because the job has just started. I'm trying some other exciting stuff, photo posts, so a place where you can take a picture over time and see how the forest changes and develops over hopefully a long period of time using drone photography, a little bit, or trying to. And hopefully someday, again, we'll be able to do in-person events because I really, really miss those. And so with that, I'm going to exit out of the presentation and try to stop sharing my screen. Did I do it?
You sure did.
Thank you. And we would love to take some of your questions. So I think, Gwen, should they just type them into the chat box if you have additional questions?
Yep, any questions, just feel free to type them into the question box and we can monitor those there. Oh, Jeff is starting us off with a question. Should I do an ash inventory on my 20 acres parcel?
Yeah, Jeff, I think that's a good idea. I mean, I think it depends. So Ginger can speak more to municipalities and the way they do an ash inventories, both in their right of ways alongside their roads and as sort of the street trees in some of the more developed areas. They might do a like ash by ash inventory. What I'd recommend, Jeff, and we can talk about this more, is just sort of getting an idea of the percentage of your forest, which is ash. And if you're interested in doing management, you might want some more information like, in general, how big is it? You know, what are the different potential? Is it mostly just firewood, or might there be some saw logs in there as well that you might be interested in harvesting? And so I would just do that by sampling. So I'd do that by like setting up a little grid on your wood lot and taking points and then extrapolating those points out to sort of represent what percentage of the whole forest composition is ash, rather than trying to inventory each individual tree.
Great. And there is a question coming in about cemeteries and village greens. Should ash trees be removed, and should the town replace with nut, or what type of trees are recommended as replacement?
Yeah, so I can take that one. Can you all hear me? Okay. So Jeanette, that's a great question. Because I was actually just communicating with someone in the Upper Valley today that their community did an inventory in their cemeteries of ash trees because their cemetery stewards were concerned that when the trees fell that they might damage the headstones. I think they have a lot of you know, older historical cemeteries, and that's definitely something to be aware of. But whether the trees should be removed or treated is a question that the cemetery caretakers or the municipality will really need to decide, because it's going to depend for every community whether they want to take out those ash or if they want to treat them. Depending on, you know, the size of the ash, the amount of resources that the community has, how people feel about the trees, if they're really attached to them and they're magnificent or they have historical value. So it really depends, but I would definitely inventory them, and that should be something that the community should be aware of. And then similarly, in terms of if you choose to remove the trees and replant with a different species, because obviously we're not recommending at this point that people replant with ash, although the USDA, it does have a breeding program where they're trying to breed resistant ash varieties. You know, we really recommend that people choose the right tree for a specific location, and that's going to vary depending on light conditions and soil conditions and how much people can take care of the tree when it's young. So the replacement trees will vary depending on the habitat.
And one thing that I'll also say, like taking a note out of the forest book, if you're going to replant trees, like replant a bunch of different species of trees. Diversity is not just important in the woods. Like, it's crazy when you go into some of these housing developments and they just were like, we like green ash, and so every tree is a green ash. And so if they were, you know, those trees, probably all of them are going to have to get removed now. And so if you were like, I like, pick a tree, sugar maple, and then something came along someday in the future that's going to affect sugar maple, it's just not a good plan. So whatever you do, I would say use a bunch of different species and don't just replant with all of one thing.
Great. Our next question is from Ellen. Is there a certain age of tree that EAB prefers?
They prefer the larger trees, more, you know, mature ash. And they also prefer green, black and green ash over white. And they'll also prefer ash that are stressed. They'll go after those before they'll go after healthy trees. I don't know, Ethan, if there's anything you want to add to that.
Yeah, they like the bigger ones, and they're, you know, on the sort of like the first wave, they'll take out all the big ones, and then, but we are seeing, like I said in my presentation, that they are persistent on the landscape and they will infest like smaller and smaller ones.
Yeah,
So
I've seen saplings with less than an inch DBH, so they're with research there. So they will attack any size in really heavily infested areas.
totally, yeah, it's yeah, that's all I'll say about that.
All right, our next question is from Bana. I have a lot of ash saplings of different sizes next to my house at the edge of the old apple tree, trees. How much thinning should I be doing, and how close should they be?
Well, so I don't, you know, just with saplings, Bon, I wouldn't say worry too much about it. One thing that, you know, we are doing a little bit is actually trying to, where we have healthy larger ash, you know, that's a ash tree that's maybe 8 or 10 inches in diameter. Nice healthy tree, nothing wrong with a nice symmetrical crown, doing really well. We are actually thinning around those trees with the idea, I think I said, you know, to give them a little more juice. The idea is basically to alleviate the stresses of competition on those trees, which will give them more energy to then fight EAB. And you know, there's a whole spectrum. It's not like a tree's resistant or it's not. There's a whole spectrum of resistance. And some trees will, you know, succumb very easily. Some trees might succumb less easily. And if the tree doesn't have to worry about competing with its neighbors, it might have a better chance. So I wouldn't worry about like little saplings, but once the trees get to be a little bit bigger, I would be thinning them. And the way that I'd be doing that is basically just finding your healthy ash tree, looking up the tree, and cutting less healthy trees whose crowns are touching the crown of that ash tree. And if you were to divide the crown of that ash tree sort of up into 4 quadrants, like 4 sections, just do that within 2 of those quadrants at a time. You don't need to totally create a ton of space all the way around that crown, just on a couple of sides, and just give it a little bit more room.
Great. Let's see. Kim had a great question that, Ginger, I think this one goes to you. Do you have volunteer groups go out into forests and trails to do some research, meaning to try and cover more territory for you where trees may threaten public safety?
Absolutely, Kim. That's a wonderful question. So I manage a program called Forest Pest First Detectors, and most of our work right now is focused on emerald ash borer, but we also look for other invasive insects. And so if anyone who's interested in that emails me, I would be happy to get you on the list and send out information. But different things that the Forest Pest First Detectors do. First, we're going to have an online course. We used to have in-person workshops about them, but we'll be having an online curriculum this fall and then again next spring, where you learn about the natural history of these organisms and then things that you can do in your community. And so for emerald ash borer, we have folks who are during the flight season who are putting up traps, and then you monitor those traps. You might have seen those triangular purple plastic things that hang from trees that we call prism traps. So you check those to see if they've caught any emerald ash borer. You can survey trees in your community and assist with doing inventories for your municipality and mapping your ash trees. And also we train people to be photographers, because it's really hard to get for sort of a regular person who hasn't been trained in how to take the best photographs to send to the team that then analyzes whether we should go out and visit a tree, because we have limited number of staff, as you pointed out, who can actually go out and visit every ash tree in the state that people call us up and are concerned about. So we are trying to have a cadre of people who can expand our capacity that way. So just send me an email and I'll send you more information.
Excellent. And we are just about at 8 o'clock, and I think that's a good place to stop with a nice plug for our forest pest first detectors. Remember to visit our two websites, vtinvasives.org or vtcommunityforestry.org for more information on all the topics that we talked about today. And with that, I want to thank Ethan and Ginger very much for their time and expertise, and we will send out the recording soon. All right, thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you all for coming.